So how did I get here? I was born in northern Canada, about 6 hours north of Toronto. I really was a hillbilly, as you can see from the picture. I grew up on a farm outside of a mining town. We had the last farm on the road. Behind our house was literally hundreds of miles of crown land, government land that was undisturbed, unpopulated. And you could see Russia from my house. Growing up in that kind of unregulated environment, really it was lawless. There was no, I don't recall anyone ever getting a permit or a license for anything. I drove every conceivable vehicle and never got my license. And so did everyone else. But growing up in that kind of environment, actually, when I became a designer, when I began to live the kind of urban life that I live, I was actually quite kind of embarrassed by that whole episode. Our house was built on a rocky hill, and that meant that we couldn't get running water into the house in the wintertime. So my job as a young man was to actually go to the well with a snowmobile each day and provide water to the house from the well in the valley. And I really, I thought that was a whole other life, that I had that life experience, and now I had an urban life experience, and they were completely unconnected. But I realized over time that, in fact, that experience is what really informs the design work that I do. For one thing, about 1 billion people still have that problem. About 1 billion people still don't have access to that. Having actually experienced it gives you a whole different way of understanding it, and it really puts empathy at the core, and for me, that's the core of design practice. That ultimately, what I do is work with people on their challenges and help to solve them. And that empathy that really emerged in that environment is really, why I work the way I work. I became a designer quite by accident. I didn't really intend to, but I love putting images and words together, and that turned out to be design. I started as a graphic designer doing books, and I've designed about 260 books over the years, and produced about a dozen of my own. I became an author because I needed to research what was going on to understand what to do as a designer. If you think about that time, this was almost 30 years ago, the computer had not yet been introduced to the workplace. I needed to understand what was that going to mean, and where would I work? What would be the contribution I could make? So I started to do research and eventually became an author. I wrote a little text called The Incomplete Manifesto for Growth that had a kind of life of its own. It was completely surprising, and it was really about how do you sustain a creative life. As I mentioned, I've published about a dozen books that I either authored or co-authored, and they're all about the changing context of our world. How is the world evolving? What are the new possibilities? What are the new challenges? And what can design do under those conditions? I did a book called Lifestyle, which really was about the image economy, how the image world is shaping our experience. This is a book that I did in Japan with Minoru Mori, who's a developer and economist, called New Tokyo Lifestyle Think Zone. This is a book I did with Rem Koolhaas called Small, Medium, Large, Extra Large. And it really was a book that changed the way that we think about architectural publishing. What we really wanted to do was look at the reality of architectural design, not the image of it, not the brand look, but really what's the reality of making the world in a new way. That work all that work led to more and more commissions to do things that I didn't know how to do. I was very, very fortunate to work with some of the most extraordinary people of the last century, including Rem, and this is the Seattle Public Library that we worked on together, the Walt Disney Concert Hall that we worked with Frank Gehry on. This is a new museum of biodiversity in Panama City that just recently opened, and it was really about understanding how do we sustain the ecology of Panama as one of the richest places in the world for biodiversity. I worked with a group of people out of Guatemala to design a movement in Guatemala to allow the citizens of Guatemala to imagine their future again. They explained that they had had 36 years of civil war, 36 years of the culture of death, and their citizens didn't dream. And I was really shocked that people would not dream. And I didn't realize that, in fact, dreaming is an infrastructure. We are taught to dream. We learn how to dream. And we develop an expertise in dreaming. Every designer, every artist, every person I imagine coming to South by Southwest is just expects to dream. Well, they said we don't, because we've had 36 years of death. Most of our people have known nothing else. And so we did a project called The Culture of Life, and it was really about recovering and beginning to build the foundations of life again in Guatemala. We changed the first day that I arrived, they took me to meet the vice president, and they said, "This is Bruce, and he's going to redesign Guatemala." And I said, "Guys, like, time out. Like, I didn't say anything of the sort. And if anyone offers to do that, you should run away from them, because the only people who can and will do it are Guatemalans. And we can help you. We can help you advance it. We can help you accelerate it, but ultimately you're going to do it." And they said, "Well, you got to change the name of the country then." And I was like, "Wow, you guys really think big. Why would you do that? Right? Why would you do that?" And they said, "Well, the place is called Guate when the Spanish arrived. The Spanish hated it, so they called it Guatemala, which is bad Guate. And how would you like to grow up and live in the United States of bad place?" And I said, "You really got a point." So we added an extra A, and we launched a movement called the Guatemala movement. And Amala is the love of Guate. And it really was a love movement that really transformed the country. It transformed the political dialogue and really changed the way that people thought about possibility.